All right, I want you to just close your eyes for a second and imagine this. The year is 1942. We're in Billund, a small town in Denmark, and it's occupied. In the middle of the night, you see flames just tearing through the sky. An entire workshop is burning to the ground.
And the owner, Ole Kirk Christiansen, is just standing there completely helpless. He's watching his entire life's work, every tool, every bit of inventory just turn into ash.
And this isn't even the first time he's faced a loss like this, but maybe the worst part of it all. His own workers are standing there beside him, silent. And you can see it on their faces.
Yeah.
They blame him.
Yeah, and that image, that moment of just absolute devastation, it isn't some footnote in the Lego story. It's literally the foundation. This deep dive isn't about some genius who had a brilliant idea from day one.
No.
It's about how a company that was basically defined by debt, doubt, and, well, fire, somehow became one of the world's most powerful brands and a philosophy of creativity.
So that's our mission today. We want to understand the sheer resilience it took to build this thing. It's a journey that starts with tragedy, not innovation. With bankruptcy, not a breakthrough.
And the craziest part, the real paradox here, is that the thing that ultimately saves the company isn't the beautiful woodwork that Ole was famous for. It was a simple, kind of ugly plastic brick that everybody laughed at.
A material that was basically seen as cheap and disposable.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's dig into that first part. The really dark foundations, from about 1932 to 1942. We have to start with the man himself, Ole Kirk Christiansen. By all accounts, he was a master craftsman, a perfectionist.
Oh, completely obsessed with quality. But, and this is a huge but he was not a good businessman.
That's the key, isn't it? His hands knew how to make things perfect, but his timing was just awful. The Great Depression hits Denmark, and his carpentry shop, which made furniture.
The orders just evaporated. I mean, overnight, he was suddenly drowning in debt.
And right on top of that, just to make things worse, his wife dies in 1932. So now he's got 4 young sons, no income, and a world that really does not need another carpenter.
Right. Most people would have just quit, filed for bankruptcy, and walked away. But he makes this incredible pivot, and I think it came from, a really deep place. He realized that even when families had absolutely nothing, kids still needed to dream.
They still needed to play.
Exactly. So he stops trying to build tables and chairs, and he starts making toys. Little wooden yo-yos, pull-along animals, that famous wooden duck.
And he needs a name for this new venture. He comes up with Lego. It's from the Danish phrase, leg godt.
Which just means play well. A perfect mission statement, really.
A beautiful idea.
Yeah.
But it didn't really help with reality, did it? Sales were terrible.
Abysmal. The retailers just didn't trust him. You know, here's this guy who just went bankrupt, and he wants us to stock his toys. The debt was piling up again. The tension was constant.
Which brings us right back to where we started. That horrific climax in 1942. The fire.
Yeah. I mean, can you imagine the psychological weight of that? You lose your wife, you lose your business, you claw your way back, carving little toys, and then it's all gone again.
That silence from his workers must have been just deafening.
It had to be a crucible moment. But he didn't give up. He took what little insurance money there was, got his sons to help, and they rebuilt. And this time they focused obsessively on quality.
And that actually sparks their first real success, right? The wooden era.
It does. Their hand-painted, perfectly polished toys started getting noticed. They even won an award for Best Toy Company in Denmark. They had finally made it.
So of course, it was time to risk it all again. Because what Ole does next is a complete break from everything he knew, everything he believed in.
It is a very strange new chapter. It's 1947. He's at a toy fair in Copenhagen, and he sees this weird machine. An injection molding machine. It's loud, it's industrial, and it's spitting out these little plastic pieces.
But plastic was so controversial then. Why was it such a taboo for toy makers?
It was seen as cheap. It was the opposite of craftsmanship. Wood had warmth, it had soul. Plastic was just seen as this mass-produced, low-quality material.
Soulless.
Totally soulless. Most of the other toy makers at that fair just walked right past it.
But Ole saw something else, and he took this unbelievable financial gamble. He buys the machine, the first one in Denmark, for what was basically a full year's profit.
And his son, Gottfried, who's managing the money, he thought his father had lost his mind. He actually confronted him, said he was betting their entire future, everything they just rebuilt.
On this plastic nonsense.
Yes, and Ole's response is just, it's one of the most prophetic lines in business history. He just says, they don't want it yet.
Wow. They don't want it yet.
The foresight in that is just staggering. He was betting on what the material could be.
But in the short term, Gottfried was right. The first plastic toys were Pretty crude, little teddy bears, some rattles, they felt cold, sales were awful.
And the really fascinating part is that the idea for the brick, the iconic interlocking brick, wasn't even his original idea.
No way.
He found the concept in a catalog from a British company, Kittycraft. He saw the potential in these self-locking bricks and just immediately started redesigning and perfecting them.
Okay, but even with a better design, the bricks still failed.
Yeah.
This is the part of the story people always miss. Why didn't they sell?
Well, retailers had three big complaints. One, they were still too expensive. Two, they were plastic, which people still didn't like. And three, this is the most important part, they didn't hold together very well. The builds would just fall apart, a kid would get frustrated, and that was it. And the sets didn't even come with instructions, so by 1954, they were literally drowning in unsold plastic bricks.
Just a classic near-death moment for the company. They were so close.
So close. It took an outsider to finally point out what was wrong.
Right. Godfred goes to an international toy fair, and a buyer from Britain gives him this piece of feedback that changes everything. He looks at all their different toys and just says, "You don't have a system."
That one line, it reframed the whole mission. The goal wasn't just to make a toy. It was to create a philosophy, a whole universe where every single piece could connect with every other piece.
So Godfred rushes back to Denmark and starts sketching. What if every brick, no matter the size or the color or when it was made, what if it all just fit together?
And that's what leads to the moment of genius in 1958. They redesigned the rear one last time. They added the interlocking tubes on the underside.
Which sounds like a small change, but it was everything.
It was an engineering marvel. It created this perfect clutch power, strong enough to hold together, but still easy enough for a child to pull apart. And they made sure a brick made today would still fit a brick made back then. That commitment to the system, that was it.
But here's where the story gets so heavy again. Just as they perfected this world-changing design, Ole Kirk Christiansen has a heart attack and dies in 1958.
He never got to see it become a global phenomenon.
And the universe just wasn't done testing them. 2 years later, 1960, lightning hits the factory.
Another fire. And this one destroys the entire remaining stock of all their wooden toys.
The psychological toll of that, I can't even imagine. Your father just died, you finally have the magic formula, and then lightning literally strikes you down again.
It's unbelievable. But looking back, that 1960 fire, it wasn't a disaster. It was what they call a clean slate. They had no wood left, none. Godfred had to make a final, irreversible decision.
No more wood, only plastic.
That fire was the moment that brained away the past for good. It forced them to become the Lego we know today. The pivot was finally complete.
So, okay, let's fast forward. We go through decades of just insane growth. The system works perfectly. By the 1980s, Lego is an institution. But then a new kind of threat appears. It's not fire, it's not debt, it's the digital age.
Yeah, the very thing that made them successful for 30 years, that simple, perfect system, suddenly starts to look like a liability. In the 90s, you've got video games, consoles. Kids' attention is just being pulled in a million different directions.
And the brick suddenly looks old-fashioned.
Right. And the company panics. They start chasing every trend you can imagine. Clothing lines, theme parks, and worst of all, they started making all these weird, complex, one-off pieces that didn't fit the system.
They lost their identity.
Completely.
Yeah.
They thought the brick wasn't core enough, but the real problem was their own internal chaos. The supply chain became a nightmare because they were making thousands of unique, non-systematic parts.
And the whole thing just spiraled. Debt piled up, sales crashed, and it all hit rock bottom in 2003. They reported these just devastating losses, over $200 million.
The analysts were writing them off. They were saying, you know, this is it, the end of Lego. The world's most creative company had forgotten how to create.
And the turnaround came from a new CEO, Jürgen Vignodstorp, who made a decision that was, well, pretty brutal. He basically said the solution wasn't to add more things, it was to cut things.
A lot of things. He cut all the non-essential projects, he simplified the organization, and he radically reduced the number of different pieces they were making.
He brought them back to the core.
Back to the 1958 brick. The sets became smarter, they achieved more with fewer, more versatile pieces, manufacturing costs plummeted, and crucially, they started listening.
To the fans.
Yeah.
The adult fans, the AFOLs.
Yes, and they embraced outside stories. This is what led to things like Lego Star Wars, Harry Potter, Bionicle. They fused the structure of the brick with stories that kids already loved. They found their relevance again without abandoning the system.
Which brings us to the ultimate triumph, I think. The Lego movie in 2014. Everybody expected a 90-minute commercial.
And what they got was a cultural phenomenon. The movie had so much heart. It was this beautiful message that imagination, not just following the instructions, is what makes things special. It resonated with everyone who ever played with those bricks.
And sales just exploded. Lego ended up surpassing giants like Apple and Disney to become, for a time, the world's most powerful brand.
Think about that journey. From bankruptcy, from being ridiculed for choosing plastic, from 2 factory fires, to that.
So when you look at this whole story, what does it mean for you? The why behind their survival. It's not really in the plastic itself. It's in that belief system that Ole started with. That play is how we learn to rebuild.
That creativity actually grows stronger when it has constraints, when it has rules. And that real success means having the courage to endure failure.
And here's the final thought I want to leave you with. Despite all the technological shifts we've seen, the basic Lego brick hasn't changed its shape or dimensions since 1958.
It's a design that was forged by fire and perfected through failure. And every single masterpiece you build with those bricks, every spaceship, every castle, it started the same way the company did, with an idea that probably faced some doubts, some setbacks. The real secret that Lego teaches us is that everything amazing starts small and just clicks into place one piece at a time.